In the summer of 1967, Black Power activist A. Trap Brown entered Cambridge, Maryland on an invitation from civil rights activist Gloria Richardson to give a speech. Brown had entered Cambridge during a very volatile time, as just 3 years earlier, the Civil Rights Act had been passed, and yet despite this, black people in Cambridge, and all throughout America, still felt marginalized. A few days after Brown gave his speech, the town of Cambridge lay divided and broken after several buildings had been burned in what was dubbed by the media as the 1967 Cambridge Race Riot. This was not the first instance of racial tension in Cambridge, as only 4 years earlier, in 1963, the people of Cambridge had experienced an earlier riot. The social, economic, and political exchange between whites and blacks in Cambridge, Maryland, led to the violent encounters at the Cambridge riots of 1963 and 1967, and revealed racial tensions that are still prevalent to this day. Cambridge was founded in 1684 by English settlers and had consistently gained an African American population as slavery became more prevalent in the local economy. Cambridge was seen as a progressive southern town as they had advocated remaining with the Union in the Civil War. After blacks had been freed by the 13th Amendment, many blacks started working in the local fisheries industry. Eventually, in the early 1900s, the most prominent corporation in Cambridge was the Phillips Packing Company, which had provided jobs for and given political clout to the black community. However, in the 1950s, the packing company had run into serious troubles and had to lay off most of its workforce, which was mainly African American. In the early 1960s, the Freedom Rides took place, in which black activists rode in the front of public buses throughout the Deep South. In 1961, the riots reached Cambridge, which brought on the issue of civil rights in the area, and inspired local citizens to take action. One individual who had taken up the cause of civil rights was Gloria Richardson. Mrs. Richardson had originally joined SNCC to join the civil rights movement, but she eventually created her own civil rights group called the Cambridge Nonviolent Action Committee, or CNAC, in 1962. Mrs. Richardson knew that blacks needed not only equal political rights, such as voting and desegregation, but greater economic advancement, as the fall of the Phillips Packing Company led to the black unemployment rate reaching near 50% in Cambridge.
When the packing company came, then that left off a wide area of even low-income jobs. And so I think that that situation was stirring a lot of dissatisfaction and anger on top of everything else.
So, in 1963, Mrs. Richardson met with the then Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, and the Mayor of Cambridge, along with several other civil rights leaders, in order to draft an agreement known as the Treaty of Cambridge. This agreement addressed issues that had plagued African Americans in Cambridge, such as employment discrimination, voting, and desegregation. Despite all the leaders agreeing to the treaty, the portion that had dealt with desegregation and public accommodations was repealed in favor of a referendum on the issue of desegregation. Mrs. Richardson promptly encouraged black voters to boycott the referendum, as she believed that civil rights were non-negotiable. After the boycott, tensions in Cambridge were at an all-time high, as many young blacks did not have jobs and had gotten tired of discrimination. In the summer of 1963, black youth started throwing rocks at local businesses that would not hire them. Eventually, the local police got involved and had escalated the situation. Cambridge experienced its infamous 1963 riot, which led to the intervention of the National Guard.
I guess the police couldn't control it if they, in fact, tried to. And the governor got upset, and he sent in the National Guard within that next 2 or 3 days, because obviously people were going to fight each other.
After the dangerous encounter of 1963, the city of Cambridge was left with burnt buildings and a tired population. However, the people of Cambridge were about to see their fortunes change. Between 1963 and 1967, Cambridge experienced a period of improved economic conditions, as well as the dismantling of de jure caste barriers. Cambridge and the surrounding region received about $4.7 million in federal funds due to Great Society anti-poverty programs. In addition to the new spending, some business owners refused to desegregate, not because they were racist, but if they had done so, they would have lost their white clientele. The Civil Rights Act solved this problem, so they now had a reason to desegregate in such a way that they would not lose business. In addition to increased economic opportunities, blacks also became increasingly influential in politics due to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. However, with increased political and economic rights, blacks became aware of what they had not yet achieved socially. They were, on paper, equal, but they had yet to hold actual equal standing in society.
And at that time, it wasn't like I went around every day and people were calling me names and stuff, but I knew what my boundaries were and I stayed there. And so it was like, okay, as long as I stayed there.
Despite the remaining social inequality, Cambridge was hailed as a progressive town, as the media reported on the reduced poverty and unemployment, as well as the destruction of official barriers to the advancements of blacks. However, what the media did not take into account was the fact that Cambridge, even after 3 years of increased rights and relative prosperity, was getting ready to boil over in civil unrest once more. The best example of the remaining challenges faced by blacks in Cambridge was Pine Street Elementary, a black school that was overcrowded and underfunded. A fire engulfed Pine Street, and the police falsely accused Dwight Cromwell. Cromwell was first arrested in 1963 for praying outside a segregated business, which directly influenced the passage of the Treaty of Cambridge, and he was now unfairly prosecuted again. Cromwell's arrest led to Senac's request for Gloria Richardson to return to Cambridge once more, and Mrs. Richardson was not alone. After her arrival in Cambridge, Mrs. Richardson invited H. Rap Brown to speak. H. Rap Brown was a Black Power activist who was elected to SNCC as a moderate, even though he was anything but.
I told Rap that he didn't need to make a wild speech like he does because they were already, upset and stirred up. But he did, and that night, police shot at him. There was no riot going on when that happened. He was just walking somebody that asked to be walked home because they lived near Ray Street. And he and 3 or 4 other people were doing that.
Because of this, the National Guard was stationed in Cambridge for a supposed training session. During his speech, Brown would say that violence is American as cherry pie, and that Detroit exploded and Newark exploded. It's time for Cambridge to explode. After Brown gave his speech, a local Cambridge resident known as Pamela Waters asked Brown to escort her home. Brown walked home with her with a few people who followed him after his speech. Brown was confronted by the sheriff of Cambridge on his way, and the sheriff told him to stop marching with his followers. Then, without warning, the sheriff fired his shotgun and Brown got hit by the buckshot. He quickly escaped and left town, but his speech enraged some of the white residents of Cambridge. A few hours after his speech, a group of white men rode through the black wards and started shooting at buildings.
It usually was in response to the white people in the city of Cambridge at that point coming over into that black ward with Molotov cocktails, with guns, riding them down the street, shooting.
Many blacks attempted to retaliate, and the National Guard got called into what was now another riot.
I think the Guard more or less felt that it was people from the outside of the communities that was causing all the problem.
You mean people like these Brown?
Right.
During the riots, buildings were burned yet again, and the National Guard were ordered by Governor of Maryland, Spiro Agnew, to maintain law and order. Just like Brown, Agnew was an elected moderate who became very polarized, as he put all the blame of the riots on the black community. After the riots, Cambridge lay broken once more, as 2 blocks and 20 buildings were destroyed. In the fires, there were at least $300,000 in damages to homes.
Basically acceptable, but today it is not. This is the way the communities felt against people of color. And at that time, that was, as Eastern Shore space was an accepted thing. And then people came in and agitated, and it brought change, yes. But was it done the right way? I'm not one to say.
After the riot had occurred, things quickly quieted down in Cambridge, and by 1970, Cambridge was the same tranquil town that the Eastern Shore had always known. Gloria Richardson had moved to New York permanently. The riots of 1963 had occurred because blacks knew they were being denied a right to economic safety and political rights, such as voting. Yet even after these issues were resolved, tension built, because even though blacks had received equality in law, they were still ostracized in practice. The same issue of social and racial inequality still plagues black communities across America today, as cities such as Ferguson and Baltimore recently erupted in protest over their views that blacks are still discriminated against by police. This has directly led to the Black Lives Matter movement.
I don't know why they keep saying riots, because I'm not even sure. I don't think what happened in Baltimore and Ferguson were riots. I think that was emotional explosions from people.
The social exchange between blacks and whites that caused the riots back then is similar to the exchange that has caused the unrest today. Even though the events at Cambridge, Maryland ended long ago, the lesson gained from these encounters is still relevant, and if we look back at them, we might learn something.